of the potter, my shape changed with every touch. His workmanship, His perfection, oh, He loved me so much. Daily
I got to thinking about these quaint sayings, and I thought how that actually a lot of them come from the Word of God, as does a lot of things, as a matter of fact. A lot of the Bible has been brought forth into maybe looser, if that's a proper word, terms, but the origin of a lot of things comes from the Word of God. So, anyway, when doing that, we studied about leaving no stone unturned. Thank God, I'm glad they rolled that stone back one day, and Lazarus came forth, and the Lord also. In Romans chapter 1, we studied about if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You've all heard that before. Simple little thoughts with deep meanings when applied to God's Word. Galatians chapter 6, we last studied on you reap what you sow. I've heard that all my life from my parents. I heard it many times. Tonight I want to give you a few thoughts on another subject tonight, another quaint saying that somebody all of you, I'm pretty sure, has heard this before. And other than Joyce and Dee, which I've already tested the water on, just see what they said. Does anybody have any idea, looking at this psalm, what it might be, just out of curiosity? 63. This is the psalm the Lord gave me to go with this quaint saying that I'm using tonight. Yeah, that's a good one too. I'm going to make a note of that. That'll work too. That's another one. I got about 50 of them there. And I'm just trying to go through them as the Lord lets me until He says, stop that, go and move on. How about you don't miss your water? There you go. All you city water dwellers, and wait a minute, y'all got a well. Y'all got well, don't you? You got a well, and most of you in here got a well before, so we ought to remember that. There was a time when we were on wells or branches or springs. I remember that, matter of fact, when you got to go get a bucket full. But point being is there was times when the well would go dry. Nobody ever thought about the well. Nobody ever considered the well, what a blessing it was until it was gone. Then everybody said, what are we going to do? Why? Because water is a necessity. So I want to bring you a few thoughts tonight about you don't miss your water till your well runs dry. Now, in direct context, I'm calling this spiritual water, but the principle still applies. A lot of times we take for granted, some of us probably tonight, at least I hope you do before work tomorrow, go home and get in the shower and turn on a nice warm water in there with a nice fancy shower head on it and gets different adjustments on it and all kind of stuff, and be able to stand there and enjoy what ought to be a 3-minute shower, and you take 30 minutes in just because it feels good until you run the water out, and then your mate says, what am I going to do? I don't have any hot water. Point being is, it's a blessing to be able to have water at all, not to mention hot, warm water when it's cold. When you think about water, it's a necessity of life, naturally speaking. And when you think about this particular saying here, as far as I can remember, is one of the oldest ones seem like I've ever heard. And it has to do with appreciating what has been a blessing to you. It could be, and it could be for many things, applied to many things. But in the sense of water, I think is the truest meaning of it, because it reminds us of how much we must have water to live. You can go without eating food. I know a lot of us don't think you can, even for 4 or 5 hours, but you can go without eating food for several days. But you can't go too long without water, because you'll die. Water is a necessity of life. Matter of fact, all these rockets they're sending up to these other places and wherever they land at, I don't know, they're sending them everywhere now. They're looking for one thing, signs of water, because it is the necessity of life as we know it. And so that is what they're looking for it all the time. Sometimes, though, that we forget about how much we're blessed. Water is all over this little ball that we live on. We have water everywhere. And yet and still we don't appreciate it like we should sometimes. There's places on this globe that has almost no water. And in those places, it is a dried up, sad place. Almost nothing is alive on it. Some places just have a little bit of rain a year. The vegetation is almost gone totally. And some places literally gone. And some places I read where somewhere, I can't remember the name of it now, where they said it hadn't rained in hundreds of years. That's hard to imagine when you think about how many feet sometime that we have here. But water is a necessity, no doubt, that is being taken for granted in the natural sense in America. And all over the world, I suppose, unless you get in one of these third world countries. And I remember even in Vietnam, we had water problems sometimes that we couldn't get water. And we didn't have bottled water then. They may have, we didn't see it. But we had water, and we had to take water, and we had to chemically treat it. We had to filter it, and then we had to treat it with chlorine. And if you didn't get the chlorine just right, it'd mess you up bad. And it was just a lot of trouble just to get our water. And even then, a lot of times, it wasn't good water. Now we've got water everywhere, bottles and everything. It's not the same as it was. But I'm saying that water has always been one of the priorities that man says he has to have, but when man gets the water, he forgets about the blessing of having it in the first place. And when you think about that, it's no wonder that when that applies, as David says here to the Psalms, in the spiritual sense, the same things apply. Let's read a few verses of this psalm. O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth for thee. My flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. Because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. When I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches, because thou hast been my help. Therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. The little preface there in the Bible says the Psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. This apparently was when he was on the run from his own household, because he was king based on verse number 11. So this was when he was running from his own son. When you look at these things, you understand that David was a man that had realized something more than natural water. But may I say today that if you look at our day, when you get to looking around, if you've ever tasted of good water, I tell you, there never will be a bottled water that'll ever be as good as an old galvanized bucket down in a deep well drawed up with a dipper on it and getting it to where it's sweating on the side. It'd be colder than if you would put ice in it in our day. I'm telling you, it was good water. And the taste of it was so good to the taste. It was just something different, uniquely different. We had water in a bucket that we kept there, but I remember many times we'd be hot, and we'd draw us up a fresh bucket of water just because it just tasted better, because it was fresh. I want to say, spiritually speaking, if you've ever been in touch with the real deep well water of God in worship and in holiness and the goodness of God, none of this other water that's been published today is any good. all this water that we're getting today. There's all kind of bottled water out there, and you'll taste one bottle and it's horrible. Another bottle and it don't taste as bad, but it's not as good as it you'd have, and so forth. The truth of the matter is, a lot of people never have in their life ever tasted good, old, good-fashioned water that's really good for them. But let me say this, it's the only water that is available pretty much in our day, naturally speaking. But apply that spiritually now. Spiritually speaking, there's a lot of people today that have never had the privilege to sit and listen to real water being given out by the preacher or by the teacher or by some singer that was singing in the Spirit of God and magnifying the Lord for the purpose of giving water for the soul. Jesus said, He said, if you'll take of this water that I'll give you, He said, you'll have a well of water springing up into everlasting life. He said there'll be fresh water at all times. I'm afraid, though, in our day we've come to the place over the years when we had good churches sitting around everywhere. We had good preachers around, had good Bible around, good singers around, and all of a sudden, as we do with natural water, I'm afraid some of us got to the place where we started taking it for granted, and we didn't appreciate what it happened to get us to that point. I want to say the churches that have come out of the era of the doctrines of the Catholic Church and all the different things that was in opposition to the truth of God, they suffered tremendously to give us the truth of the water, the good tasting water that we've enjoyed, and we've been enjoying it for years. But I'm saying now that we've come to the place where we said that we took it for granted, and we've now been poisoned by a lot of substituted water. It's not really from the well of God. It's another water that the world has produced. But let me say this. That being the case, here was David. David was a man after God's own heart. David was a man that worshiped God. David was a man that gets so happy that he would dance for the Lord. He was a man that would fight. He was brave. He was a man that worshiped God in instrument and in song. As you know, many places of the Psalms where it was penned by David as he sung a joyful noise unto the Lord. And the Bible tells us here that David was at a place now. He'd been driven out pretty much, running for his life, and he missed one thing. Oh boy, when I thought about this, tears rolled off my face. When I thought about, here's the problem in our day. It's not that we don't know that the water's not any good. It's that we don't have enough people that have ever tasted of the good water that have said, I don't want no more of this mess. I want some good water. I mean, it'd be a good thing if about half of us independent Baptist preachers would run out of town on a rail and then ask God to send somebody to give us real water again of the truth of God and the grace of God. But we're not seeing much of that. But David said, O God, Thou art my God. Early will I seek Thee. My soul thirsteth for Thee. You know what he was saying? He was saying, like my body, naturally speaking, thirsts when it is void of water. And when he needs water for that body in the flesh, he said, my thirst down inside of me is yearning and reaching out and craving that water, that taste that I have once tasted. But here David is not talking about water in that sense. David said, and I know that because he said, early will I seek Thee, my soul thirsteth for Thee. He said, it's not my body. I've got plenty of natural water. But he said, oh God, my soul is not getting the taste that it wants, that it lacks, that it's used to, that it's tasted of before. And he said, my soul keeps reaching out and saying, dear God, we want that water back. We want that water back. I'm saying it's a good day in your life when God says the norm is not good enough and you want the truth again. You want that water again that you've tasted before. I've seen so much bad water that I'm sick of it. The taste is no good. It does not satisfy. the soul of man that's been born again. He said in that verse, he said, clearly, my soul is literally dehydrated spiritually. Now, when you get dehydrated physically, it will cause you all kind of problems. Has anybody ever been bad dehydrated and had some of the effect? Your memory gets messed up, and all kind of your organs gets messed up. You have cramps. You can't think straight. All kind of things go on. And when you get to that place of just simple dehydration, Brother Doyle, just not enough water in the body, this old body suffers. As simple as that is, and truthful as we know that is, church, tonight, how much more does the soul of man, when he's spiritually dehydrated, suffer? How much more does he suffer in the pains of dehydration because the spiritual water that he needs is not available and can't be found. But here's the thing. David said, here's the one thing that I know for sure about it. I recognize that I need it. I recognize that I'm running short. I recognize I missed something. That's what bothers me today. People will go out of a church where truth is at and go sit down where the water is either totally dried up or either there's another water substituted, and guess what? They sat down and drank like nothing ever happened. I don't get that except for one thing. Their soul wasn't drinking to begin with. Something's missing. David said, I can't take it. He said, my soul thirsted. That thirsted word means to suffer for. It means his flesh, like his flesh was pining or longing after that fluid into the body. The soul was longing after something from God. David said in verse number 1, he said in that verse, my flesh longeth for thee in a dry and a thirsty land where no water is. He said, you know what happens to land when it dries up? I noticed for the past, say 4 or 5 years, I know times we've had a lot of rain, but as a whole, there's been some droughts around. And I've noticed that Brother Doyle cutting the grass, it's sunk down, it's shrinking up, and down around the house it's dropping around, just dropping down. And you find that if you go out in the places where it used to be nice ground, all of a sudden now there's cracks in the ground, and it's not normal anymore. It don't look the same anymore. It's got all kinds of cracks in it, and all it's really saying is we need water. I need water. Oh, dear God in heaven, help us as Christians to get to the place to where we recognize that our soul, so to speak, if I can say it in a spiritual sense, has cracks in it looking for water because we once had it, but we didn't miss it. Now until the wells done run dry, we don't have any more. And just like old Elijah down there by the brook, there's no doubt about it. He sat there by that brook, and that natural water came every day, and God sent the food every day, and he drank to that brook, and he stayed there till when? Till the brook dried up. I want to say if the brook dries up, there's time to start looking at the brook. What's wrong with the brook? But in this sense, of course, with Elijah, it was the Lord. But I'm telling you folks, in our own lives, it'd be good if we get to the place again where we say to ourselves, my soul obviously is hurting for spiritual water. And I want to tell you, in our day, you can find a whole lot of water, but it's really, really, really hard to find spiritual water. There's so much could be said there, but our songs have deviated from spiritual songs. Our preaching has deviated from spiritual water in the preaching. It's become man's concoctions now instead of the spiritual water of the Lord. God's water works. It always has worked. It always will work. And he said he was the water of life, if you remember that. But here's a good thing that David knew and admitted and didn't deny. David said in that verse 1, I am in a land that is thirsty. People that need it. People that are craving for it. But he said the problem is, in the latter part of verse 1, there's no water for it. Now, if you look at that in one way, it's one thing. If you look at it in another way, it's another thing. But David was really saying, me. David was saying, I'm the one that's calling on you, Lord. I'm the one that needs it. David said that he knew there was no water where he was at. Now, it didn't mean that God wasn't with David. It just meant that it wasn't what David needed for his soul. And I want you to get that. You can be a Christian, and once you're saved by the grace of God, you will remain a Christian forever in eternity. That will never change. Do not misunderstand that. Nothing can undo that. But I want to tell you, there's a world of difference in living on the mountaintop where the water might be, or where down in the valley where there is no water. Maybe that's reversed, but point being is this. You've got to get to the place where you recognize your own condition. Now, in my case, I don't like drinking water out of the Chattahoochee because I don't like drinking Atlanta sewage. That's about what it amounts to. No doubt about it. They admittedly dump raw sewage in there when it rains. Been that way for years, and they don't ever fix it, so there's raw sewage going in it. Well, it ain't no problem. We treat it. Well, you drink it. I don't want it. So we haul at a very much strenuous hauling of water bottles in for Joyce's coffee and for my drinking water and her drinking water and all the family. And I guess y'all probably do similarly, if I can get that word out, except you well people. And it's a lot of trouble to get that water, but I see there's a need there that I can't overcome. I just can't lower myself to drink that mess anymore because of the potential, what may be in it, high potential. So I go and look for some water. I go to Walmart. They got water over there, 50 barrels of it, seemed like, for $3. I mean, you're talking about some cheap water. And then they got some water over there that I don't know why they even put it in there at Walmart. It ought to be somewhere else. It's real expensive. And it's always the one that supposedly tastes the best, naturally. So, point being, there's all kind of water there. That's the same way churches are today. We realize that we need something. The world needs something. And then I believe that Christians need something. And I believe, though, that sometimes we settle for the cheap water, so to speak, instead of saying, no, I want the good water. And when I look at that, I see that and I understand that the very fact that I go out and get that says one thing about me. I refuse to drink the mess out here. I'm going to drink. It's going to work me harder. It's going to cost me more money. But I see the benefits of it, and I don't mind working and doing that in order to get it. And I don't complain. Matter of fact, I bought some hand trucks that'll carry them things for me and where I don't have to. What I'm saying is this. Sometimes in the church, we'll get to the place where that down in our soul, we don't tell nobody this, but down in our soul we're crying and we're hungering for something that we've had before, something we've tasted before, but something has stolen that water of life from you, and you're just sitting there and you know something's missing, and it's very easy to say, well, over yonder I can get this bottle and I can get this bottle of water, I can get a different water yonder, and this is all the problem it is. But folks, I'm telling you, the first thing you got to recognize is that the taste that God put in your mouth was put in there by the Lord Himself. I never wanted to taste God's water until God put that taste in my mouth. I wanted the world's water. But glory be to God, one day that water became bitter, and I didn't want it anymore. I was looking for something else that would satisfy my soul. David said, I want some water. Now notice this. Stay with me. I'm not just rambling around. I'm trying to help you with something. You don't miss your water till the well runs dry. I'm afraid that we should be more thankful than we are for what God has blessed us with in truth. But he said, in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, and then he defines that in verse number 2, to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. David said, if I could apply that seeing to drinking, then, because he referred to it in verse 1 as drinking and thirsting, then David was in effect saying this, Lord, I've had a taste of the good stuff. I've had a taste of your glory. I've had a taste of your power. And Lord, even though there's much water of the world sitting everywhere, it's not what I want. But Lord, I need something like I used to have. I've been there. I've done that. And I know what it is. And if you ever been there down in your soul, you might cover it up by drinking other waters and other fountains, but it won't never be what you enjoyed until you get back to the real water that God blessed you with of His glory and His power. Again, he didn't say, I'm not saved. He didn't say that he didn't have water where he was at. He didn't say that he couldn't pray where he was at. He didn't say that he couldn't magnify the Lord where he was at on the run. But he did say, that's not satisfying me. You know, I found out over the years, a real Christian, somebody that I believe that was really saved, they might drift off and taste some other waters for a while, but they cannot stay out there. There's only a time period, which I don't know what it is, but something down inside of them one day will get them to the place where they just say, I don't know, I can't go no further. I've got to have something else. And you know what we do most of the time in the church when it gets that way? Instead of seeking the glory and the power of God, we'll start substituting the world's water, so to speak, in as substitute to make up for that. But folks, listen, the change lasts for a little while, and it may taste good for a little while, but the real world is that satisfying the soul part will never come, and it won't be sustained unless the truth is kept on poured out for people to drink and drink and drink. We don't have many people that are seeking what number 2 is. He said he was seeking to see thy power and thy glory. I'm convinced as a whole, religion as a whole could never drink from this number 2 verse right here and be perfectly happy with never tasting it. I'm convinced a lot of our independent Baptist churches can never taste that and be perfectly happy about it. But I want to tell you right now, the Lord may not be blessing sometimes the way you want Him to, but a real Christian never stops wanting Him to. Never stops seeking Him. And David said, I know I am not what I need to be. You know, we often tell somebody, nobody will ever get help from the doctor until they admit that they're sick. Nobody will ever seek the water until they appreciate and recognize that their water has run out. Let me ask it this way. Where is that joy? Where is that overwhelming humbleness, an overwhelming fullness down in your soul that sweetened your spirit, that made your heart merry, that made you lift up your hands to Him, made tears roll off your cheeks. That's what David was saying. David was saying, I remember the days when I looked ahead and I would lift my hands to the Lord, and the joy of the Lord was my strength. But he said, now my soul has lost its joy because it's lost its water. He longed to see that again. See, he had been there. So what does he do about that? The very first step in getting back to that is recognizing that and admitting to each one of us that we have taken our water for granted, and the well is run dry in our own heart. God's well never runs dry, but it runs dry in our heart because we failed to desire it. But God said it's there. He said in verse number 2, He said, thy power, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. You know what the sanctuary is? That was the assembly, the place of worship. What does that correspond to us? You're in it, the church. What is it that God's saying to us here? Don't ever be satisfied. Don't ever be content with just saying, just get it over with. You know, Baptists, I think, are the world's worst. Now, the Church of God, and some of them will go in and they'll just sit there and wait and work up a spirit if there's nothing there a lot of times. But the Baptists will go in there and they'll just carry right on, spirit or not, Brother Doyle. They'll get it over with so we can get on home. And we just go in there and say, well, let's keep it going here. Got 30 minutes or less. Let's just get this thing done. But truth of the matter is, if we were thirsty, we wouldn't mind waiting a little longer. We wouldn't mind seeking a little differently. And I believe if everybody in the church ever did come together in any church seeking God the way that they should, the way we should, there's no telling what God would do. Look at the day of Pentecost. They were there waiting, seeking God, waiting, praying in the Spirit. And look at how the place was shaken. Look at how afterwards when they prayed and the whole place was shaken. Why? Because they were together and had all things in common. They sought the glory of God. The sanctuary is not made as a place to endure. Look at the average sanctuary and you'll find a lot of people sleeping during it, dozing off. Our flesh is good for making us do that. May I remind you, though, that only reveals there's something missing down on the inside. The soul is not satisfied. The soul is satisfied in those cases, and it can go right to sleep. Verse number 3. Because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. He said, nothing else will do. I took my water for granted, but now my well has run dry because I'm banished from the place that I wanted to be. Listen, if I've learned one thing, Pastor, and over the years I've learned this: nothing stays the same. Everything changes. And the blessed time that you have, the most glorious time that you could ever have, and you think, what a wonderful day, and God has put this church together in such a manner. Boy, it's just wonderful. And next thing you know, it's changed. That didn't mean God changed, did it? It just means maybe that God's wanting us to seek Him a little bit more. You realize that I don't have to preach every time. We don't have to sing every time. But we do have to drink every time. And I'm afraid a lot of times we do sing and do preach and don't drink. And the soul goes out with its head hanging down because something cut it short. Something restricted it from receiving what it needs. Remember, you have to seek it. That water from Walmart or wherever I buy it at don't come to the house. I have to go get it. I have to want it. I have to pay for it. I have to labor with it, getting it in. And when you get to the place of where you're thirsty enough to where you'll say, I don't mind. I just got to have anything, nothing matters as long as I get this water that my soul needs desperately. Verse 4 and 5. He was remembering in the days when the testimonies flowed right off of his lips. Thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness. My mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. He said, I remember in the sanctuary. In effect, David was saying, the water I'm looking for is what I found in the sanctuary. The spiritual water was the way the sanctuary was. The joy of the Lord, the glory of the Lord, the power of the Lord, the testimonials of the Lord. That's what David was craving for. And it was all in the sanctuary, which is the church in our day. And then he said, this is real to me, because verse number 6, when I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee in the night watches. You know, we can go through life, we can go through a service in the church and we can smile, hey, how you doing? And all kind of things like everything's good, and we can even lift our hands or do something like that or say amen or anything. All at the same time, the soul inside of us saying, please give me a drink, please give me a drink. I mean, the Baptists are world-class hypocrites. We're good at it. We're better actors than Hollywood ever thought about being, folks. You might as well admit it. All of us are that way to some degree, some more than others. David said, I'm tired of that. He said, when I get on the bed at night and I'm laying there, you know what? There's no noise. There's nobody to please. There's nobody going to comment on him. But David said, this is what I go through. It's not just trying to make a statement here to you, but when I lay down, it's just me and God. He said in that verse there, when I remember thee on thy bed and meditate on thee in the night watches. He said, my mind is fastened on thee. My hunger is after you. And I can't get away from it. And it goes from me night and day. God help us again to get to a place where we can get back to hungering for God again. And thirsting for God again. Verse number 7. David said, because... in the night watches, he said in verse 7, because thou hast been my help. Therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. David said there's only one safe place. And in the shadow of the wings, that's in type as a bird will take those little birds or chickens or whatever it is and put them under their wings and protect them. You got to go through the mama to get to them. It's a protection. And it's relating it to the Lord. And he said, whenever I get to the place where I'm to the place of under your wings, close by, feeling your warmth, feeling your touch, hearing your heartbeat. Oh, all those things, knowing you're close. He said, then will I meditate. Then will I feel at ease. Then, he said, because therefore the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. He's saying, I don't have it in verse 1, but he said in verse 7, if I can get back to that. He said, my voice will go up again. My song will come back in my heart. My tears will roll off my face. My prayers will increase. My Bible increases. My reading increases. My church going will increase. I won't be able to hardly get to church late or anything. I'll be early because church is meaning so much to me. Everything means it because I found it in the sanctuary. I'm saying when we get real about it. David said, I desperately need it, and I suppose based on other things about David that David did not appreciate or miss the water that God had blessed him with until his well had run dry. But boy, he misses it now. I remember old well out at Mountville. We had an old well out there. All of a sudden one day, all of us started getting sick. Come to find out, we got yellow jaundice from the well water. I don't remember what we did. It seemed like we put Clorox in it or something. I don't remember, but something. And we had to, for 6 weeks, we had to take little thick, yellow-looking spoonful of stuff for that yellow jaundice. All the whole family, kids. I don't think Mom and Daddy got it, if I remember right, but all the kids did. And to this day, none of us can give blood for that very reason. Came from the water, bad water. I went out there. It's been a few years back now, in the old house place, and they hadn't even ever where the house burned, and it burned in 1962 or 61 or 62, and walked up on there, and there's the old stove still wrinkled up and rusted, Brother Doyle, under the weeds. And I said, the old well used to be right back here, and walked back there, and lo and behold, without any curb, we never had a curb, had an old wooden thing over it, but it wasn't there. Just a big hole in the ground. And I said, I wonder, surely that thing is not open now. And I chunked a rock. And I said, my goodness, that's dangerous. So I cautiously went over there to the edge and looked over in there. And there's that water, just as good, as pretty as it could be. Same water, same well. Wasn't the same water, but same well. It poisoned us, in effect. There it was. Animals could fall in it. People could fall in it. If you didn't know it was there, it'd be very easy to walk in that thing. They may have filled it now. I don't know, but it don't look like it driving by. Everything else looks the same. But the point being is this. The bad wells, bad water seems like always stays around. But that good water, for that well to be functional again, it'd have to be drawn off, cleaned out, cleaned up. It probably would work then if you did that again, because when we had it right, it was a good well of water. I remember when we dug the thing. It was pretty deep. Remember getting down in there with Daddy, digging that. Dink, you remember it? That old red dirt down there, red, rocky-looking grain, looking all of a sudden it started getting real moist down there. Dig a little deeper, and the water started oozing up. Wasn't too long, we had it deep enough. The water was good. The point I'm making is this, and I'm through. A well can be a blessing, or it can be a curse if we don't tend to it. Bad water will hurt you. It'll kill you, naturally speaking, real quick. In Vietnam, we had constant problems with bad water. As I mentioned, people getting sick all the time from all kind of diseases, just from the water. But, spiritually speaking, the soul must have water. And sometimes, as a church, or churches, we take it so for granted when God has so blessed us, because when everything's going so good, we tend to forget God and thanking Him like we should when we get desperate. When we're desperate, we really seek God. And when we're really desperate, we start going and begging God. And God blessed the children of Israel. Go back through the history. He'd bless them. They'd backslid. He'd bless them. They'd backslid. He'd bless them. They'd backslide. It just kind of had to work that way. Seemed like that's man's ways. But the point I'm making is David's soul is an example of our soul. We need the Lord. I will not. I refuse to drink of the world's water of religion. I will not, by the grace of God. I'll stay at home and have church at the house with myself or Joyce before I'll take part in some of the mess that's going on today. It just don't taste right. I cannot. It doesn't help me. Matter of fact, when I go and see something, it makes it worse in me. I have a worse sickness in my soul than if I'd never seen it at all or tasted it at all. But I must say, I've taken God for granted many times. The blessings that God's given us, the water that He's given us. And I'm speaking to us now specifically. Let's not take our water for granted that God has blessed us with. Let's not forget it until it's gone. Because if you think it won't go, it will go. And don't judge how big of numbers and how big, and I'm not making excuses for that. I'm just making the statements of fact. You cannot be happy as a Christian if you've ever tasted the real water. You may have other things that'll make you feel better, but not the soul. David said, my soul thirsteth. You don't miss your water till the well runs dry. Let's make sure our wells don't run dry.
He's my all and all. He's my all and all. Every time I get in trouble, on Him I call. He's my bread when I'm hungry. He's my shelter from the storm. He's my rock in a weary land, and this world can do no harm. When I'm way down in the valley, the Savior takes me by the hand. He leads me up on top of the mountain and lets me view the promised land. He's my all and all. He's my all and all. Every time I get in trouble, on Him I call. Some sweet day I'm gonna travel